In the darkest corners of a galaxy, where even the most hardened warriors fear to tread, there exists a prison moon called Zirion 7. It's not a place for ordinary criminals. It's where the Galactic Council sends the most dangerous, the most vicious, the most irredeemably violent beings in known space. The kind of monsters that make entire star systems shudder at their names. Among these nightmares walks Kethvar, a Vorthak death wolf whose very presence turns the blood of seasoned killers to ice. Standing 9 feet tall, with razor-sharp claws that can slice through starship hull plating, he's killed more sentients than some wars. Even the other inmates give him a wide berth, knowing that proximity to the beast means probable death. When Kethvar contracts the Crimson Plague, a disease so virulent it could wipe out entire populations if it spreads, the Council faces an impossible choice. They can't let him die and risk the plague mutating within his alien physiology, potentially becoming even deadlier. But they can't send their best medical teams either, because no one survives close contact with a death wolf long enough to administer treatment. So they do what they always do when they need someone expendable. They send a human. Dr. Sarah Chun receives her assignment with the clinical detachment of someone reading a death sentence. A routine medical consultation on Zirion 7. No mention of the patient. No mention of the disease. No mention that she's being sent to die alongside the galaxy's most feared predator. But the Galactic Council has made a critical error in their calculations. They know humans are considered weak, fragile, unremarkable creatures good only for menial tasks and suicide missions. What they don't know is who Dr. Sarachin really is. They don't know about the scars hidden beneath her medical uniform, or the military records sealed so deep that even their extensive databases can't access them. They don't know about the nickname that once struck fear into the hearts of enemy commanders across 3 sectors. They don't know they just sent the Angel of Death to save the galaxy's most dangerous monster. And Kethvar, dying alone in his cell as the plague ravages his body, has no idea that his salvation is walking through the prison corridors, carrying a medical bag in one hand, and secrets that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy in the other. Sometimes the most dangerous predator isn't the one with the biggest claws. Sometimes it's the quiet one with steady hands and eyes that have seen too much death to fear it anymore. The Council wanted to send someone expendable to die with their monster. They have no idea what they've just unleashed. Dr. Sarah Chun stared at the assignment pad in her hands, the holographic display casting a pale blue glow across her weathered features. The sterile white walls of Medical Bay 7 hummed with the quiet efficiency of automated systems. But Sarah barely noticed the familiar sounds. Her attention was fixed on the sparse details scrolling across the screen. Mission, medical consultation location, Zirion 7 correctional facility patient, classified duration, indefinite authorization level, Council Executive Order 7749, indefinite duration. She murmured to herself, setting the pad down on her desk with deliberate care. In 23 years of medical service across the Outer Rim territories, she'd never seen an assignment with indefinite duration. Emergency surgeries lasted hours, plague responses lasted weeks, colonial medical surveys lasted months at most. Indefinite meant one of 2 things. Either the Council had no idea how long the job would take, or they didn't expect her to survive long enough for it to matter. The soft chime of her door alert interrupted her thoughts. "Come," she called, not looking up from the pad. Commander Vextal entered, his blue-scaled Alterian features set in their usual expression of barely concealed disdain. As the ranking medical officer aboard the Council ship Determination, he made his feelings about human staff abundantly clear from the moment Sarah had been assigned to his department. Humans, in his opinion, were useful for exactly 2 things: manual labor and jobs too dangerous for more valuable species. "Dr. Chun," he said, his translator rendering his clicking speech into perfectly enunciated standard. "I trust you've reviewed your new assignment." Sarah finally looked up, meeting his golden reptilian eyes without flinching. "I have. The details are somewhat lacking." The details are what the Council deems necessary for you to know. Vextal moved to stand behind her chair, close enough that she could smell the sulfur-tinged scent of his breathing apparatus. Zirian 7 is a maximum security facility. The patient you'll be treating has contracted a dangerous pathogen. Your job is to provide palliative care until the situation resolves itself. Palliative care. Sarah repeated the words slowly, tasting their implications. Not curative treatment. Not prevention protocols. Palliative care. The patient in question is beyond saving, Vextal said, circling her desk like a predator. But the disease he carries poses a potential threat to galactic security if allowed to run its course unchecked. Someone needs to monitor its progression and ensure it doesn't spread beyond the facility. And that someone is me. Indeed. Vextal stopped directly in front of her desk, placing his clawed hands on its surface and leaning forward. You should feel honored, Doctor. The Council specifically requested a human for this assignment. Sarah felt a familiar cold weight settle in her stomach. She'd heard those words before, spoken in different voices, but always carrying the same message. We need someone expendable. During the Proxima Rebellion, they needed someone expendable to treat wounded insurgents behind enemy lines. During the Helios Station crisis, they needed someone expendable to enter the contaminated medical bay. During the evacuation of New Geneva, they needed someone expendable to stay behind with the wounded who couldn't be moved. Each time, she'd volunteered. Each time, she'd survived when logic said she shouldn't. Each time, she'd come back carrying scars and knowledge that the brass prefer to classify and forget. When do I ship out? She asked. Your transport leaves in 4 hours. Pack light, personal effects only. All medical equipment will be provided on-site. Vextal straightened, adjusting the ceremonial braiding on his uniform. Oh, and Doctor, given the nature of this assignment, the Council has authorized hazard pay. Your accumulated salary will be forwarded to your designated beneficiary in the event of unforeseen circumstances. After he left, Sarah sat in the silence of her quarters for a long moment. Then, she reached into the bottom drawer of her desk, past the regulation medical texts and supply requisitions, to the locked metal case hidden beneath a stack of personnel files. Her fingers traced the scars on her knuckles as she entered the access code. Not the string of numbers in her official file, but the one burned into her memory by 3 years of hell that the Council preferred to pretend had never happened. The case opened with a soft hiss, revealing contents that would have caused Vextal considerable alarm. Nestled in custom-molded foam lay instruments that bore no resemblance to standard medical equipment. Some might have been surgical tools, if surgical tools were designed for field work under hostile fire. Others were more difficult to classify, their purposes known only to specialists in fields that officially didn't exist. At the bottom of the case, wrapped in black cloth, lay her old identification tags. Not the sanitized medical credentials that hung around her neck now, but the originals, the ones that bore her real rank, her real unit designation, and a serial number that would make any military database analyst reach for their security clearance verification. Major Sarah Chun, Combat Medical Division, Special Operations Command. The Angel of Death, they called her in the field reports. The medic who walked into hell and brought soldiers back alive, no matter the cost. The woman who'd performed battlefield surgery while under artillery bombardment, who'd amputated limbs with improvised tools while enemy snipers tried to put her in their crosshairs, who'd crawled through contaminated tunnels to reach wounded men that everyone else had written off as dead. The woman who'd disappeared from all official records after a classified mission went sideways and left her the sole survivor of her entire unit. Sarah closed the case and locked it again. Whatever waited for her on Zirian 7, she had a feeling she'd need more than a standard medical kit to handle it. For hours later, she stood in the docking bay of the prison transport Mercy's End, watching the stars streak past through the reinforced viewport. The ship's captain, a grizzled Terran named Morrison, had given her a brief rundown of their destination during the hyperspace jump. Zirian 7's not like other prisons, he'd said. nursing a cup of synthetic coffee that smelled like burnt electronics. And so they send the ones that are too dangerous to execute and too violent to rehabilitate. Everything from war criminals to genetic deviants to things that don't have names and standard. Things, Sarah had asked. Morrison's laugh held no humor. Doc, there are species out there that make humans look like house pets. Predators that evolved on worlds where everything bigger than a microbe wants to eat everything else. Some of them are so violent that their own people exile them rather than try to control them. Zirian 7 is where they end up. Now, as the ship dropped out of hyperspace, Sarah got her first look at her destination. Zirian 7 hung against the star field like a malignant tumor, its surface scarred by impact craters and atmospheric disturbances. The prison itself was built into the moon's largest crater, a massive complex of reinforced structures connected by underground tunnels. Energy barriers flickered around the facility's perimeter, creating a dome of lethal force that would vaporize anything attempting to escape. Not exactly a vacation resort, Morrison commented, joining her at the viewport. See those towers around the main complex? Automated defense systems. They're programmed to target anything that moves without proper authorization. And those aren't stun weapons. Document prison breaks aren't exactly tolerated here. The docking procedure took nearly an hour, with multiple security scans and authorization checks. When they finally received clearance to enter the facility's landing bay, Sarah was surprised by its efficiency. The bay was spotless, with maintenance crews moving in precise formations around the various ships. For a prison housing the galaxy's most dangerous criminals, it operated with military precision. Warden Corvash met her at the airlock, his massive Krugan frame filling the corridor like a living wall. His species was known for their size and strength, but also for their rigid adherence to protocol and duty. His purple-tinged skin bore the ritual scars of his rank, and his 6 eyes studied her with the intensity of someone accustomed to evaluating threats. Dr. Chun, he rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. I am Warden Corvash. Welcome to Zirian 7. I trust your journey was uneventful. Quite peaceful, thank you, Sarah replied, hefting her equipment cases. I understand you have a medical situation that requires attention. Corvash's expression darkened, which was impressive given that his natural coloration was already quite dark. Indeed. Come, we must discuss the parameters of your assignment before you begin treatment. He led her through a series of corridors that spoke of serious security concerns. Every door required biometric scanning. Every intersection was monitored by multiple cameras, and armed guards were stationed at regular intervals. The prisoners they passed wore inhibitor collars that would deliver incapacitating shocks if they showed aggressive behavior, and their cells were sealed with energy barriers rather than traditional bars. Tell me about the patient, Sarah said as they walked. Patient 7749, Corvash said, consulting a datapad. Kethvar of the Vorthak death caste, sentenced to life imprisonment for crimes against sapient species across 14 star systems. Body count exceeding 2,000 confirmed kills. Sarah felt her steps slow slightly. The Vorthak were legendary even in military circles. A warrior species that had been conquered and scattered centuries ago, their survivors selling their services as mercenaries and assassins. The Death Caste represented the pinnacle of their martial evolution. 9-foot-tall predators with natural weapons that could tear through combat armor and reflexes fast enough to dodge energy weapons at close range. And he's sick, she said. Crimson Plague, Corvash confirmed. Contracted 3 days ago from an unknown source. The disease is problematic. Problematic how? They stopped at a security checkpoint where Corvash submitted to additional scanning. The Crimson Plague is a bioweapon developed during the Hegemony Wars. He explained once they'd been cleared through. It was banned by the Galactic Convention for good reason. Mortality rate approaches 90%, and it's highly contagious during the symptomatic phase. Worse, it has a tendency to mutate rapidly in different species, potentially becoming even more virulent. So you need someone to monitor its progression and ensure containment, Sarah said. Why not send a full medical team with proper isolation protocols? Korvash's laugh was bitter. Because patient 7749 has killed every medical professional sent to treat him. Even sedated, even restrained, even dying from plague, he remains one of the most dangerous beings in this facility. The council decided that the situation required a more expendable approach. They reached a final checkpoint, this one leading to the high-security wing. Through the reinforced transparisteel, Sarah could see a corridor lined with cells that looked more like containment units. Each one was sealed with multiple layers of security, from energy barriers to physical blast doors to environmental controls that could flood a cell with knockout gas in seconds. Dr. Chun, Korvash said, his voice unusually gentle for a Krugen. I want you to understand what you're walking into. Patient 7749 is not merely violent. He is violence incarnate. His species evolved on a world where everything was prey or predator, and they chose predator. Even dying, even weakened by disease, he represents a clear and present danger to your life. Sarah looked through the transparisteel at the sealed corridor beyond. Somewhere down that hallway was a creature capable of killing trained professionals even while fighting a lethal plague. The council had sent her here to die, believing that her death might provide useful data while containing a potential pandemic. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. I understand, she said quietly. Show me to my patient. The corridor leading to patient 7749's cell stretched before Sarah like a gauntlet of reinforced steel and flickering energy barriers. Each step echoed despite the sound dampeners, and she could feel the weight of dozens of sensors tracking her movement. Behind her, Warden Korvash maintained a careful distance, his 6 eyes constantly scanning for threats that might emerge from the sealed cells lining their path. The isolation unit is at the end of this corridor, Korvash explained, his voice carrying an undertone of tension that hadn't been present during their earlier conversation. We've cleared all adjacent cells and established a quarantine perimeter. Environmental systems have been modified to maintain negative pressure and full-spectrum sterilization protocols. Sarah nodded, adjusting her grip on the medical kit she carried. The weight felt familiar, though the contents were far different from what Korvash might expect. Years of experience had taught her that medical emergencies in hostile environments required more than just traditional healing tools. What about the previous medical personnel? She asked. How exactly did they die? Korvash's steps faltered slightly. The first team consisted of 3 Altarian physicians and a Centauri specialist in exotic diseases. They approached with full containment protocols, atmospheric suits, energy shields, remote manipulation tools. Patient 7749 was sedated and restrained at the time, and security footage shows him awakening from sedation during their examination. Despite the restraints, despite the sedatives, despite being weakened by 3 days of plague symptoms, he managed to break free and kill all 4 medical personnel in under 30 seconds. Sarah processed this information as they continued down the corridor. A Vorthack death warrior killing 4 medical professionals in 30 seconds while sick, sedated, and restrained spoke to capabilities far beyond normal biological parameters. Either the containment protocols had been inadequate, or patient 7749 was exceptional even by his species standards. How did he break the restraints? That's unclear, Korvash admitted. The restraints were rated for beings 3 times his size and strength. The energy shackles should have prevented any significant movement. Yet somehow he not only broke free, but did so in a manner that suggested the restraints had been systematically disabled rather than simply overpowered. They reached the final security checkpoint, a blast door that looked capable of withstanding orbital bombardment. Warning lights flashed red along its frame, and biometric scanners subjected both of them to intensive examination before granting access. Beyond lay a smaller corridor with a single cell at its end. This is as far as I go, Korvash said, his massive frame filling the doorway. Emergency protocols are in effect. If something goes wrong, this entire section can be sealed and flooded with knockout gas within 10 seconds. If that fails, we have contingencies that will resolve the situation permanently. Sarah understood. If patient 7749 broke containment, they'd sterilize the entire section rather than risk a plague-carrying death warrior escaping into the general population. She'd be acceptable casualties in service of the greater good. Understood, she said simply. Dr. Chun, Korvash's voice carried an unexpected note of respect. I don't know why the council chose you for this assignment, but I want you to know that your courage is noted. Few beings would walk willingly into that cell. Sarah almost smiled at that. If only he knew that courage had nothing to do with it. She'd stopped being afraid of death the day she crawled through a collapsing tunnel filled with nerve gas to reach her wounded squad mates. Fear was a luxury she'd abandoned somewhere between her 15th battlefield surgery and her 20th confirmed kill. The cell door was a marvel of engineering. A circular portal set into a wall of reinforced composite that could probably survive a direct hit from a plasma cannon. Multiple scanning systems examined her as she approached, verifying her identity, checking for weapons, and analyzing her biological profile for signs of contamination. Through the cell's observation window, she got her first look at patient 7749. Kethvar lay on a medical gurney in the center of the cell, his massive frame making the heavy-duty equipment look almost delicate. Even unconscious and ravaged by disease, he was an impressive sight. 9 feet of corded muscle covered in the distinctive gray-black fur of the Vorthak, with forearms that terminated in retractable claws currently extended in sleep-induced tension. His canine features were aristocratic despite the obvious effects of illness. High cheekbones, intelligent eyes currently closed, and a muzzle that revealed razor-sharp teeth when he breathed. The Crimson Plague had painted angry red welts across his skin where the fur had fallen away, and his breathing was labored despite the respiratory support equipment attached to his muzzle. Fur lines ran to both arms, delivering fluids and whatever medications the previous medical team had managed to administer before their untimely deaths. But what caught Sarah's attention wasn't the prisoner's obvious strength or the signs of disease. It was the way he lay on the gurney, positioned perfectly to observe the entire cell despite appearing unconscious, with his unrestrained hands positioned for optimal movement if he chose to act. The previous team's restraints lay in pieces around the cell, cut with surgical precision rather than torn by brute force. This wasn't a mindless killing machine driven by disease and rage. This was a professional who'd eliminated a threat with calculated efficiency. Sarah activated her medical scanner, running a preliminary examination through the cell sensor array. Kethvar's vital signs were consistent with advanced Crimson Plague infection, elevated temperature, irregular heart rhythm, and signs of systemic organ stress. But there were anomalies in his brain activity that suggested he was far more aware than his unconscious appearance indicated. Patient 7749, she said, speaking through the cell's communication system. My name is Dr. Chun. I'm here to treat your illness. No response. Kethvar's breathing remained regular. His eyes stayed closed, and his body language suggested deep unconsciousness. But Sarah noticed a subtle change in his heart rate that indicated he'd heard and processed her words. I know you're awake, she continued. Your cardiovascular responses give you away. There's no point in pretending otherwise. This time the response was immediate. Kethvar's eyes snapped open, revealing intelligence that burned like golden fire. He didn't move otherwise, but his attention focused on her with laser intensity. You killed 4 medical professionals, Sarah observed clinically. Yet you've made no aggressive moves since I arrived. Why? Kethvar studied her through the transparisteel for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was surprisingly cultured despite the growling undertone characteristic of his species. Because you're not here to study me like a laboratory specimen, he said. You're here to die with me. The casual acceptance in his voice caught Sarah off guard. Explain. The previous team came with recording equipment, tissue samplers, and enough instruments to perform a full dissection while I was still breathing. They were here to document the plague's effects on my physiology. Kethvar shifted slightly on the gurney, testing the range of motion allowed by his remaining restraints. You came with a medical kit and the kind of confident competence that speaks of someone who's actually treated patients rather than studied them. Sarah found herself impressed despite the circumstances. Most beings in Kethvar's condition would be focused entirely on their illness and impending death. He was conducting a tactical assessment of her intentions and capabilities while fighting off a disease that should have rendered him delirious with fever. "So you killed them for treating you like a test subject," she said. "I killed them because they were here to harvest samples for bioweapon research," Kethvar corrected. The Crimson Plague wasn't naturally occurring in this facility. Someone introduced it deliberately, and those medical personnel were here to study its effects on a Vorthack physiology. My death was always intended to be educational. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If Kethvar was correct, then his infection wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate experiment. Someone had weaponized a banned pathogen and used one of the galaxy's most dangerous prisoners as a test subject. The question was whether the Council was aware of this, or if someone was conducting unauthorized research using their facilities. "And yet you haven't tried to kill me," she pointed out. "Not yet," Kethvar agreed. "You're different. Your scent carries traces of military-grade combat stimulants that have been metabolized over years rather than days. Your movement patterns speak of combat training far beyond what any civilian medic would possess. And your eyes?" He paused, studying her intently. "Your eyes carry the kind of weight that comes from killing in defense of others." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cell's environmental controls. Kethvar was reading her like a tactical manual, extracting information from subtle cues that most beings would never notice. Whatever else he might be, he was clearly an expert in threat assessment. "You think I'm here to kill you," she said. "I think you're here to clean up a mess," Kethvar replied. "Someone in the Council hierarchy authorized an illegal bioweapon experiment. Now that experiment is about to kill their test subject and potentially spread beyond containment. They need someone to ensure that doesn't happen, someone with the skills to handle both medical emergencies and security threats." He was remarkably close to the truth, though not in the way he imagined. Sarah had been sent here to die, but she was beginning to suspect that her death was meant to serve multiple purposes. Remove a witness to unauthorized research, provide cover for sterilizing the entire section to prevent plague spread, and eliminate a dangerous prisoner whose continued existence posed ongoing security risks. "The previous medical team," she said, "did they attempt to treat your condition or just study it?" "They administered a cocktail of drugs that worsened my symptoms rather than improving them," Kethvar said. "Whether through incompetence or design, I can't say. But their treatment accelerated the plague's progression rather than slowing it." Sarah felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. A bioweapon experiment conducted without proper oversight, test subjects deliberately given treatments that enhanced rather than mitigated the disease's effects, and a cleanup operation disguised as medical assistance. Someone was playing a very dangerous game with galactic security. "How long do you have?" she asked. Kethvar's smile revealed far too many teeth. "Original plague mortality occurs within 7 to 10 days. Given the accelerated progression caused by their treatment, I estimate perhaps 18 hours before systemic organ failure becomes irreversible. 18 hours to unravel a conspiracy, treat a banned bioweapon infection, and survive contact with one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators." Under normal circumstances, Sarah would consider such a timeline impossible. But circumstances hadn't been normal for her in a very long time. "I'm going to enter your cell," she announced. Kethvar's eyes widened slightly, the first sign of surprise he'd shown. "That would be inadvisable. Even dying, even weakened by plague, I remain extremely dangerous. My kind don't have the luxury of controlling our predatory instincts when stressed or in pain." Maybe, Sarah said, beginning the cell entry sequence. But I can't properly treat you from out here, and I suspect that's exactly what someone is counting on. The entry protocols took several minutes to complete: atmospheric equalization, contamination screening, and final security checks. During that time, Kethvar watched her with an intensity that would have been unnerving if she hadn't faced down enemy snipers while performing surgery under fire. "Dr. Chun," he said as the cell door finally cycled open, "I feel compelled to point out that the last people to enter this cell died very quickly. I would hate for you to share their fate simply because you underestimated the threat I represent." Sarah stepped through the doorway, medical kit in hand, and felt the weight of absolute isolation as the cell sealed behind her. No backup, no escape route, no safety net except her own skills and whatever equipment she'd managed to smuggle past security scanning. "Patient 7749, she said, meeting his burning golden gaze without flinching. "I feel compelled to point out that I've survived worse odds than this. Now let me take a look at those wounds before we both run out of time." The cell's atmosphere carried the distinctive metallic tang of the crimson plague mixed with disinfectant and the musky scent of Vorthack physiology. Sarah moved with deliberate calm as she approached Kethvar's medical gurney, her experienced eye cataloging the extent of his condition. The crimson welts that gave the plague its name covered nearly 30% of his visible skin, and his breathing carried the wet rattle that indicated fluid accumulation in his respiratory system. "The restraints," Kethvar observed as she opened her medical kit. "You're not planning to secure me before beginning treatment." "Restraints wouldn't stop you if you decided to kill me," Sarah replied matter-of-factly, pulling out a medical scanner. "The previous team's equipment is scattered around this cell as evidence of that. Besides, I find that patients tend to be more cooperative when they're treated as people rather than specimens." She activated the scanner and began a comprehensive examination. The device's readings painted a grim picture: systemic organ dysfunction, severe dehydration despite 4 fluid replacement, and neurological inflammation that should have left Kethvar unconscious or delirious. Yet he remained alert and articulate, tracking her movements with predatory precision. "Remarkable," she murmured, studying the data. "Your species' redundant organ systems are keeping you functional well beyond what the plague should allow. Most beings would have been comatose hours ago. Vorthack evolution favored survival above all else," Kethvar said. "We're difficult to kill even under optimal conditions. The plague is persistent, but not yet overwhelming." Sarah noticed something else in the scanner readings that made her pause. The disease progression showed distinct patterns of artificial acceleration, consistent with pharmaceutical enhancement rather than natural development. Someone had indeed been using drugs to speed up the plague's effects, probably to compress the study timeline and minimize exposure risks for observers. "The medications they gave you," she said, checking the empty 4 bags discarded by the previous team. "I need to know exactly what they administered." Kethvar's laugh was bitter. "A cocktail designed to suppress my immune response and enhance viral replication. They told me it was treatment, but the biochemical markers suggested otherwise. I may not be a physician, but I've been exposed to enough combat drugs to recognize immune suppressants." Sarah felt anger building in her chest, cold, controlled fury at medical professionals who deliberately worsened their patient's condition. It was a violation of everything she'd sworn to uphold, a betrayal of the basic trust between healer and patient. Someone would answer for this. But first, she had a life to save. "I'm going to need blood samples," she said, preparing a collection kit. "The standard plague treatments won't work if your system has been artificially compromised. I'll need to develop something specific to counteract both the disease and the enhancement drugs." Kethvar extended his arm without hesitation, watching as she drew multiple vials of blood. His cooperation surprised her. Most violent prisoners required coercion or sedation for medical procedures. But his trust seemed genuine, perhaps because he recognized something in her approach that the previous team had lacked. "You're not counsel," he said as she worked. Your equipment is military specification, your techniques are battlefield medicine, and your body language screams special operations. Who are you really? Sarah sealed the blood samples and began setting up a portable analysis station she'd smuggled in her equipment cases. Dr. Sarah Chun, as advertised. Though my background is somewhat more complicated than my current assignment might suggest. Complicated how? She hesitated, then decided that honesty might be tactically advantageous. Major Sarah Chun, formerly of Combat Medical Division, Special Operations Command. I've been treating plague victims and battlefield injuries for longer than I care to remember. Kethvar's eyes widened with genuine surprise. Combat Medical Division? Those are the medics who work with the counterinsurgency units. The ones who go into hostile territory to treat wounded soldiers while under fire. Among other things. And Special Operations Command? His voice carried a note of respect that hadn't been there before. Those are the humans who conduct classified missions in enemy territory. Assassination, sabotage, intelligence gathering. Sarah didn't respond directly, focusing on her analysis equipment as it began processing his blood samples. But Kethvar was clearly intelligent enough to draw his own conclusions. You're not just a medic, he said quietly. You're what humans call a combat specialist. Someone trained to kill as efficiently as you heal. The blood analysis results appeared on her scanner, confirming her worst suspicions. Kethvar's system contained not just immune suppressants, but also genetic markers that suggested deliberate modification of the plague virus. Someone had weaponized an already dangerous pathogen and then enhanced it further using his unique physiology. The plague strain you're carrying, she said, showing him the analysis. It's been modified. Someone used your genetic profile to create a variant that's specifically adapted to Vorthak biology. Kethvar studied the data with the focused attention of someone trained in tactical analysis. A targeted bioweapon, designed to be maximally effective against my species. Or potentially adapted for other species using your genetics as a template, Sarah added grimly. If someone wanted to develop species-specific plagues, a Vorthak test subject would provide an excellent starting point. Your people's enhanced physiology would make any successful pathogen incredibly potent. The implications hung between them like a toxic cloud. Somewhere in the galaxy's power structure, someone was conducting illegal bioweapon research using prisoners as test subjects. The goal wasn't just to study the Crimson Plague, it was to weaponize it for potential genocide. Can you cure it? Kethvar asked. Sarah looked at the analysis results again, running calculations in her head. The modified plague had adapted to specifically target Vorthak immune responses, but that adaptation might also be its weakness. If she could synthesize a treatment that exploited the modification's artificial nature. Possibly, she said, but I'll need access to a proper pharmaceutical laboratory, not just this portable equipment. And I'll need time. Time we may not have, Kethvar pointed out. You mentioned 18 hours before irreversible organ failure. How long would developing a cure take? Under ideal conditions? 12 to 16 hours. But we're not operating under ideal conditions. As if summoned by her words, the cell's communication system activated with Warden Korvash's distinctive rumbling voice. Dr. Chun, please report on your patient's condition. Sarah activated her comlink. Patient is stable, but critical. The plague strain shows signs of artificial enhancement. I'll need access to the facility's medical laboratory to develop appropriate treatment. A long pause. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Doctor. Contamination protocols prohibit removing any biological material from the isolation unit. You'll need to work with the equipment available in the cell. The refusal came too quickly, with too little consideration. Sarah felt pieces of the conspiracy clicking into place. Korvash either knew about the unauthorized research or was being fed information by someone who did. Either way, her request for laboratory access had been denied before she'd even finished making it. Understood, she said calmly. I'll make do with what I have. After the communication ended, Kethvar fixed her with a penetrating stare. They're not going to let you develop a cure. No, Sarah agreed. They're going to wait until you die, then sterilize this entire section to destroy the evidence. Any surviving plague samples will be harvested for further research, and my death will be blamed on your violent tendencies, leaving whoever authorized this experiment free to continue their work. Sarah nodded, then opened her equipment cases fully for the first time since entering the cell. Kethvar watched with growing interest as she revealed contents that bore little resemblance to standard medical supplies. Alongside surgical instruments and pharmaceutical compounds were items that would have alarmed security if they'd been detected. Communication scramblers, chemical analysis equipment that belonged in a laboratory rather than a field kit, and several devices whose purposes weren't immediately obvious. Military surplus? Kethvar asked. Special operations issue, Sarah corrected. For missions where standard medical support isn't available and improvisation becomes necessary. She activated a communication scrambler and began setting up a more sophisticated analysis station. If the facility's authorities wanted to prevent her from accessing proper laboratory equipment, she'd simply have to bring the laboratory to her. What can I do to help? Kethvar asked. Sarah looked up from her work, surprised by the offer. You're dying of a plague that's been artificially enhanced to kill your species as efficiently as possible. You should be resting and conserving your strength. I'm dying, Kethvar agreed. But I'm not dead yet, and I have considerable experience in surviving hostile environments and enemy action. This situation bears many similarities to being behind enemy lines with compromised support. He was right. Despite his condition, Kethvar represented a valuable tactical asset. His species' enhanced senses might detect threats that she'd miss. His combat experience could prove useful if the situation deteriorated further, and his knowledge of the facility's security systems could be invaluable. Can you access the cell's environmental controls? She asked. Kethvar smiled, revealing far too many teeth. The previous medical team was kind enough to provide demonstrations of the security system's vulnerabilities when they attempted to restrain me. I learned quite a bit about this facility's electronic infrastructure during our brief interaction. Meaning I can access not just environmental controls, but communication systems, security cameras, and possibly even the central computer network. Zirian 7's security assumes that prisoners lack the technical knowledge to exploit system vulnerabilities. That assumption is incorrect in my case. Sarah felt a surge of professional admiration. Kethvar wasn't just a mindless killing machine. He was a consummate professional who'd been gathering intelligence and developing contingencies even while fighting a potentially fatal disease. I need you to monitor external communications, she said. Find out who's been in contact with this facility over the past week, particularly anyone with biomedical research credentials. Someone authorized this experiment, and they're probably planning to collect the data soon. And if they arrive before you've developed a cure, Sarah's expression grew cold. Then, we'll remind them why sending a human was such a bad idea. As she began the complex process of synthesizing a treatment for a disease that had been specifically engineered to be incurable, Kethvar quietly accessed the facility's electronic systems. The cell filled with the soft hum of sophisticated equipment and the subtle tension of two professionals preparing for battle. Outside their isolated chamber, security cameras recorded their activities and transmitted the data to observers who believed they were watching a human medic die alongside a doomed prisoner. They had no idea that the galaxy's most dangerous predator had just formed an alliance with one of humanity's most lethal combat specialists. The real fight was about to begin. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of biochemical synthesis and electronic surveillance. Sarah worked with the focused intensity of someone accustomed to performing complex medical procedures under extreme time pressure, while Kethvar monitored the facility's communications and security systems despite his deteriorating condition. External communications spike, Kethvar announced, his voice noticeably weaker than it had been that morning. The plague was winning its battle against his enhanced physiology, but his mental acuity remained sharp. Research vessel inquiry requesting landing clearance. Manifest lists Dr. Vextal and a biomedical research team. Sarah looked up from her synthesis equipment, where a complex array of chemicals was slowly producing what she hoped would be an effective treatment. Vextal, my former commanding officer. This confirms that the research is being conducted at the highest levels of the medical hierarchy. Arrival estimate 15 minutes. Kethvar continued, his clawed fingers moving across controls that he jury-rigged from the cell's electronic systems. And Dr. Chun? There are armed security personnel accompanying the research team. This isn't just a data collection mission. The implications were clear. Once Vextal's team had gathered their research data, they'd sterilize the entire isolation wing to eliminate witnesses. Sarah and Kethvar were meant to die here, their deaths serving to cover up an illegal bioweapons program that violated every interstellar convention. How's the treatment progressing? Kethvar asked. Sarah checked her equipment readings. The synthesized compound was nearly complete, but she wouldn't know if it was effective until she administered it. And even then, Kethvar's condition was so advanced that recovery might not be possible. 5 more minutes for synthesis, then we'll find out if my theory is correct, she said. But even if it works, you'll need time to recover. Tommy might not have. Then we'll have to make time, Kethvar said simply. The synthesis equipment chimed softly, indicating completion. Sarah drew the pale blue liquid into a medical injector, ran a final purity check, and turned to face her patient. In the hours they'd worked together, she developed a grudging respect for the Vorthak warrior. Despite being slowly killed by a weaponized plague, he maintained his focus and professionalism, providing tactical support that no ordinary prisoner could have managed. This is experimental, she warned. It could cure the plague, or it could kill you faster than the disease would. I can't guarantee the outcome. Kethvar met her eyes with calm acceptance. I was dead the moment they infected me. Anything beyond that is a gift. Sarah administered the injection, then began monitoring his vital signs. The compound would either neutralize the modified plague virus or it would trigger a cascading organ failure that would kill him within minutes. There was no middle ground. Communications update, Kethvar said, his voice strained as the treatment began circulating through his system. Research team has landed. They're requesting immediate access to the isolation wing. Warden Korvash is reluctant to grant access while you're still in the cell. He's stalling, Sarah realized, buying time for the treatment to either work or kill you naturally. Probably, but his stalling won't last long. Dr. Vextal has override authority for medical emergencies. Sarah's scanner showed Kethvar's vital signs fluctuating wildly as the treatment battled the plague virus at the cellular level. His temperature spiked, then dropped, his heart rate became erratic, and his breathing grew labored. For several terrifying minutes, it looked like the cure might indeed prove more dangerous than the disease. Then, gradually his condition stabilized. The angry red welts that covered his skin began to fade, his breathing became easier, and his vital signs moved toward normal parameters. The treatment was working. Remarkable, Kethvar said, flexing his claws experimentally. I can feel the plague retreating. Your compound is actually destroying the modified virus. It's targeting the artificial genetic markers that were added to enhance the plague, Sarah explained. The modifications that made it more deadly also made it vulnerable to specific countermeasures, which means this treatment could be adapted to cure other variants of the weaponized plague. Potentially, with the right laboratory facilities and sufficient time to develop species-specific versions. Sarah began packing her equipment, which is exactly why Vextal and his team can't be allowed to leave with their research data. The cell's communications system activated again, this time carrying Dr. Vextal's distinctive voice. Dr. Chun, this is Dr. Vextal aboard the research vessel inquiry. Please report your patient's current condition immediately. Sarah activated her comlink. Dr. Vextal, patient's condition has deteriorated significantly. I estimate complete system failure within the next 2 hours. A pause. Understood. We'll be taking over patient care shortly. Please prepare for immediate evacuation of the isolation wing. I'm afraid I can't abandon my patient while treatment is ongoing, Sarah replied. Medical ethics require me to continue care until the situation resolves. Dr. Chun, Vextal's voice carried an edge of command that brought back memories of military service. That's a direct order. You will evacuate the isolation wing immediately and report for debriefing. Sarah looked at Kethvar, who was monitoring the external communications with growing alarm. Research team is moving toward the isolation wing, he reported quietly. Armed escort, full biohazard equipment, and what looks like specimen collection gear. I understand your orders, Dr. Vextal, Sarah said into her comlink. But I'm afraid I'll have to respectfully decline. The silence that followed was pregnant with menace. When Vextal spoke again, his voice was ice-cold. Dr. Chun, you are relieved of duty effective immediately. Security teams are authorized to use whatever force necessary to extract you from that cell. The communication ended, leaving Sarah and Kethvar alone with the knowledge that a team of armed personnel was approaching with orders to neutralize them both. How long do you need to fully recover? Sarah asked. Kethvar tested his mobility, rising from the medical gurney with fluid grace that belied his recent condition. The plague symptoms were retreating rapidly, leaving behind the natural strength and reflexes that made his species so feared. I'm functional now. Give me another 30 minutes, and I'll be at full combat effectiveness. We don't have 30 minutes. Sarah opened her equipment cases fully, revealing the true nature of her preparations. Hidden beneath medical supplies were weapons that would have caused considerable alarm if discovered. Military-grade combat stims, shaped explosive charges, and a disassembler rifle that could cut through starship hull plating. Kethvar's eyes widened as he recognized the implications. You didn't come here just to treat me. You came prepared for war. I came prepared for the kind of mission that requires both medical and tactical capabilities, Sarah corrected, checking her weapon's charge levels. The Council may have thought they were sending an expendable medic to die with their monster, but what they actually did was arm one of their most dangerous enemies with advanced knowledge of their crimes. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor outside. Multiple sets of boots moving with military precision, accompanied by the hum of energy weapons and the distinctive whir of atmospheric suits. Dr. Chun, Vextal's voice came through the cell's speaker system. Final warning. Stand down immediately or face the consequences. Sarah activated her combat stims, feeling the familiar surge of enhanced reflexes and pain suppression flooding her system. Tell me, Kethvar, what do you know about this facility's self-destruct protocols? The Vorthak warrior's smile was terrifying. Everything. And I have access to the activation codes. Can you trigger a selective detonation? Something that would eliminate the research data without destroying the entire facility? The biomedical research wing can be isolated and sterilized independently, Kethvar confirmed. It would destroy all stored samples and research data, but leave the rest of the prison intact. Good. Do it. Now, when I give the signal. First, let's deal with our visitors. The cell door began cycling open as Vextal's security team overrode the lock mechanisms. Sarah positioned herself beside the entrance, combat rifle ready, while Kethvar moved to provide flanking support. The team entering the cell expected to find a dying prisoner and a helpless medic. They found something else entirely. The first security officer through the door walked into Sarah's line of fire, just as she'd intended. A single pulse from her rifle dropped him before he could raise his weapon, his atmospheric suit offering no protection against military-grade energy weapons. The second officer managed to get his rifle up before Kethvar's claws opened his throat with surgical precision. Contact! Contact! The third officer's shout was cut short as Sarah's second shot took him center mass, sending him crashing into the corridor wall. Dr. Vextal himself appeared in the doorway, his reptilian features twisted with rage and disbelief. Impossible. You're both supposed to be dead. Disappointed? Sarah asked, keeping her rifle trained on his center mass. You've destroyed years of research, Vextal hissed. The plague modifications, the species-specific variants, the potential applications for population control, all of it ruined by your misguided sense of medical ethics. Population control, HFY repeated, his voice carrying deadly calm. You were planning to use the weaponized plague for genocide. We were planning to ensure galactic stability, Vextal corrected. Some species are too dangerous to be allowed unlimited reproduction. The Vorthack the Krugen combat casts, the human military colonies, all potential threats that could be managed through selective biological intervention. Sarah felt ice-cold fury building in her chest. You were planning to commit species-level mass murder using medical research as cover. I was planning to prevent future wars by eliminating the most warlike elements of galactic society, Vextal replied. A small price to pay for lasting peace. The price isn't yours to demand, Sarah said quietly. Before Vextal could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Emergency lighting bathed the corridor in red, and automated systems announced the activation of biocontainment protocols in the research wing. What have you done? Vextal demanded. Exactly what I came here to do, Sarah replied. Now, Kethvar's claws moved across his improvised control system with deadly precision. Somewhere deep in Zirian 7's research wing, shaped charges detonated in carefully calculated sequences. Not enough to threaten the facility's structural integrity, but more than sufficient to sterilize every laboratory, destroy every sample, and eliminate every piece of data related to the illegal bioweapons program. You've destroyed everything, Vextal said, his voice carrying the devastation of someone watching years of work vanish in seconds. Good, Sarah said simply. Then, she pulled the trigger. 6 hours later, Sarah sat in Warden Corvash's office, watching news feeds that were already spreading across the galactic communication networks. The destruction of the research wing had triggered automatic distress signals that brought council investigators, military auditors, and media representatives to Zirian 7 within hours. The official story was simple. A rogue medical officer had conducted unauthorized bioweapons research using prisoners as test subjects. When his activities were discovered by Dr. Chun during a routine medical consultation, he'd attempted to eliminate witnesses by triggering the facility's emergency sterilization protocols. The resulting explosion had destroyed all evidence of his crimes, but had also eliminated him and his research team. Patient 7749 had been treated successfully for plague infection and returned to general population. Quite a report, Corvash commented, reading through the official documentation. Very thorough, very believable, and it places all responsibility on a dead Alterian research officer who can't contradict the findings. Sometimes the truth is exactly as simple as it appears, Sarah replied. And sometimes the truth involves a combat medic and a death warrior forming an unlikely alliance to prevent galactic genocide, Corvash observed. I wonder which version history will remember. Sarah stood to leave, shouldering the equipment cases that once again contained only standard medical supplies. History will remember what it needs to remember, Warden. The dead stay dead, the living go on living, and the galaxy remains safe from weaponized plagues. Dr. Chun, Corvash called as she reached the door. What will you do now? I assume your cover identity has been somewhat compromised by recent events. Sarah paused, considering the question. The council would want answers that she wasn't prepared to give, explanations that would reveal capabilities she preferred to keep hidden. Her medical service career was effectively over, but that opened other possibilities. I think it's time to go back to my original profession, she said finally. There's always work for someone with my particular skill set. Killing people. Sarah's smile was cold as winter starlight. Protecting the innocent from people who need killing. As she walked through the corridors of Zirian 7 toward the transport bay, Sarah reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. She'd been sent here to die alongside a monster, but had instead found an unlikely ally in the galaxy's most dangerous predator. Together, they prevented a genocide that would have claimed billions of lives. The council had wanted to send someone expendable to clean up their mess. They'd gotten exactly what they'd asked for.